Hello and welcome to TidyX episode 96. TidyX is a screencast where we go through and explain how our code works. My name is Ellis Hughes. You can find me on Twitter at Ellis_Hughes.
And my name's Patrick Ward. You can find me on Twitter at OSPPatrick and at tidy_explained will get you to us collectively on Twitter. Tidy.explained@gmail.com is where you can email us. You can, of course, go to the GitHub repo and open up an issue, or you can like and subscribe on the YouTube channel and drop a comment in the bottom. And then finally, we do have a Patreon page if you like the work we're doing, because we like doing it, and you want to buy us a coffee or a beer. We're totally down with that too.
Yes, we really appreciate it. We'd love it if you were to become a patron of us.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so episode 96. So we have been doing a bunch of stuff on Rmarkdown lately. We've covered really cool ways that Rmarkdown can be used. Last week we covered interactive reports and how you can generate and include HTML widgets in your output so that you can send not just here's the data, but also if you want to play with it and inspect it and look at what's going on, here you go. And it's all included. It's all included in the report. There's nothing that they need to connect to externally. It's all there for them. And so we've been doing that. We've covered some fun things, but there's a cool technique that I like to use in Rmarkdown called ASIS outputs, where it allows me to dynamically edit and change what my outputs look like based on my inputs. It's not exactly like parameterized reports. It's not based like that. It's just based on the content of the code itself. And so I can write code that directly changes the outputs. And so I thought that this would be a fun opportunity to go through as-is outputs. So Patrick, do you have anything to add as I go through to share the screen?
I think this is pretty cool. I've actually never used this before. So it was this is new to me, but I could see how it'd be super valuable. And well, when you see the NBA example that we get to at the end, I'll talk about how I would normally do this and how it looks differently than what we'll actually see. And I kind of like what we'll see with the as-is output. So why don't we jump into what as-is outputs are, because this was new to me as well.
Awesome. All right, so let's get this thing started. So we'll just go through a high-level discussion about what as-is outputs are before we go into the actual example. So in the last several episodes, we've used different R chunk options. So these are changing the behavior of the code execution, the results and whatnot, kind of at a high level. We can set the title of our R chunks. So this is an example R chunk here, and so we have the title here first. We can specify whether we want warnings and messages to be shared out by setting warning to false and message to be false. By default, that will then, or not by default, but that will then suppress any warnings or messages that would be going out. We could set fig captions, fig width, fig height to specify if we have any plots to be output, how tall or how wide we want them to be, fig align to center it, or to either center it or left or right justify it in the output, echo to specify whether we want to be printing the code or whatnot. But what about how do we want the code output to behave at a fundamental level? We haven't really talked about that much. There is an argument for there is a chunk option called include, and that will specify whether you want to even evaluate the code or not. But that isn't exactly what we're trying to get at here. So there is an option in chunks called results right here, and there's 4 different options. There's markup, as is, hold, and hide. So markup is the default option that exists for your outputs, and that is just going to output the code as you'd normally expect it to. If you're used to working in Rmarkdown, you don't really need to specify results equals markup, because that's the default option that exists there. And so
it'll return whatever you see in the console, basically the way you see it in the console, except instead of the caret, some hashtags.
Yes, because it's now code output, so it's got some hashtags around there, and it'll be like grayed out as code. Next is the as-is output, and what that does is it takes the console output exactly as it is, but it doesn't prepend those two pound symbols to it and mark it as code. It is taking the output that you created and just dropping it into the report. And that's really valuable later on. We'll get into that in a second. Next is hold, which holds all the outputs from your code until the entire chunk has been evaluated. Personally, I've never used this argument or this option before. I haven't really had a use case for it, though I've heard people will use this if they have like multiple plots they're going to be output from their code chunk, but they want but they're going to be echoing the code, and so they want all the code to be shown at the very top, and then all the output listed down below, so all the different plots being generated. Like I said, I haven't really used it that much, so I can't really speak to it all that much. And then there's hide, which will hide all the results. So this allows you to specify, I want the code to be evaluated still. I'm fine with showing the code itself, but I don't want to show the output of the code. I have used this in the past, but this was before I knew of or used the include argument there. And so it seems like include is kind of a shorthand for eval false or echo false results hide. That's kind of what it seems like to me. Maybe it's intended to do something else, but that in my mental map of things, that's what it's meaning. But the value of as is has a ton of value, in my opinion. So it allows you to add a lot of fun dynamic content from your code itself. So some simple examples here. You could want to print out, and this is kind of a silly example, but print out like, this is some great content. If you like TidyX, be sure to subscribe, and then provide a link in your output, or something a little dynamic in your code. I mean, technically you could write this directly into your Rmarkdown chunk, but maybe you have like an eval when something happens, then it will add in this content versus not. And so it's a little bit easier to write this into a code chunk than try to write it in your actual Rmarkdown pieces up there. So let me render this so we can show you the difference between if you set the results as is for this versus the default method there. So we're just going to knit this example here. We're going to look to see, all right, so by default, as you can see here, what it does is I just catted this. So cat is take this string and drop it into the console, essentially, and then evaluate any of the special characters around it. And so you'll see I have these new line tabs, so these new line registers with the /n. And so it put them in as new lines here. So there's a break between these two. And then it also cat this piece, and it did it by default. It doesn't allow the code to be evaluated, or the output to be evaluated as Markdown content.
Right, and it even prints it like as it prints it in the kind of in the box of a code chunk. So if you have ever like added code chunks to like Stack Overflow or Slack or Team, like Microsoft Teams or something, if you work in groups that do that kind of stuff, whenever you're adding code, it wants to block it into these code chunks. And that's how it gets deposited here, because R is seeing this as, oh, you have code chunk where you just wrote some text, and so I'm going to give you code chunk where you just wrote some text, type of thing.
Yep. But this piece right here is exactly the same as up here. The only difference is I set results equals as is, and so that tells our Markdown, hey, when I'm outputting this, I want exactly as I output it to be recorded in the results here. And so that's why it was able, this is rendering it as Markdown, and this little piece of link here that is telling you how you can subscribe is actually a clickable link now. So I can click on that, and it's gonna, in theory, it might not work because here,
or your computer's just chugging.
Here, we can then click on that now, and it's gonna ask me to subscribe to TidyX.
Yay! And what else is important here is you used cat instead of print. So if you had used print, what would have happened?
If you use print, it's going to, so print under the hood calls format. And so what it's going to do then is actually format this string first and then print it out. So if you call format on this string, it's going to print out this entire thing. So actually it's going to include this square brace 1 ahead of time because this is actually a character vector. And so it's going to print it as if it was a character vector, including this 1. And that's not exactly what we wanted.
No. And so even if you had results as is, if you used print, it's going to look like the default version because now you're printing. Will it, or will it just print out the text exactly as that text is?
So if
it won't come out as a code chunk, I don't think.
Because we have results as is, it will, print it exactly like this.
It's going to print it like that. Yeah. Okay. That's right. Yeah. That's right.
Which is not what we want.
No.
Cool. And then one other interesting thing that I wanted to touch on is, so I don't know if many people, or if you know this or not, but under the hood, our Markdown is converting our Markdown document into a Markdown document. That's what it's trying to do. And then it calls a really cool tool called pandoc, which if you have RStudio installed, it comes with RStudio. After, I don't remember what version of RStudio comes with default. But what pandoc does is it allows you to convert documents from one format to another pretty easily. So Markdown is a very standard format to then and very easily convert it into other formats. And so that's why you're able to use pandoc to convert your Rmarkdown, the Markdown output from your Rmarkdown into Word, PDF, HTML very easily, as pandoc knows how to handle that. And so what you can do is you can just write, if you know the output type, you can write code intended for your output type just in line. And so here I'm writing, our output is HTML. So I'm going to write some HTML code here. So this is a third level header. Say, since it's an output in HTML, I can write inline HTML, and then I'm adding a span around my inline and making italic and blue. So we're not going to go into exactly how HTML works. I just wanted to pass that information on. It also works exactly the same for as is outputs as well. You can specify results as is, write your HTML code in there and just cat it out. And then when you see the output, as you can see, we have our inline HTML that I wrote, as well as the cat as is output included in the bottom there. And so once again, this is a way to add more dynamic, make your code and results more dynamic and valuable. So I like doing that.
Yeah.
And then we also have our as is outputs here converted to.
Let's see an example of where you might use this.
Yeah, let's do that now. So we're gonna roll back to our NBA example. So we've used this now a number of times for this, but the goal was so that we don't have to focus on the actual code itself. We can talk about the differences and the new tips and tricks that we're adding to this. And so this is the NBA, or we're going to give this title NBA. The output's going to be an Rmarkdown HTML document. And let's look at some NBA game statistics for the 2021-2022 season. There's nothing new in this first chunk. What we're going to do is we're going to set echo to false and include as false. So this means it's going to evaluate the code, but hide any outputs and hide any code outputs. From this, we're going to set our option chunks to be by default echo true. So by default, it's going to print out the code. We're going to load in some libraries and suppress their startup and warnings because we don't really want those in our outputs. So we're loading tidyverse, rvest, and plotly. Patrick, do you want to take us through the rest of this? Actually, I just realized I've talked a lot.
Yeah, we'll set our plotting theme, which we always do, set it to light. We're going to create a little custom function that's going to allow us to standardize all of our data to have a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1 for whatever columns we're going to apply this to. And then we're going to do a quick scrape job here from the webpage basketballreference.com. for the 2022 season, 2021-2022 season. And we're going to explicitly say which table we want to take and table 6, and we're going to convert it to a tibble and get rid of the rank column and do all the stuff that we've done in the previous several episodes. So now we've got a table of 30 NBA teams and their season to date performance, production on shooting and rebounds and stuff like that. And then we get to our team names. So this is where we're going to use the as is in the little specify results equals as is there. So the way that I would normally do this, what you're going to see when we output this, what I would normally do if we wanted a table of just the team names, I would probably have taken the team names out, created a single column data frame called team names, and probably use something like knitter and knitter's cabal function to basically turn it into a table, a single column table that is output nicely into R, or I would have used a GT table or a DT table or something like that, some sort of table function. I think you need, yeah, there you go. There you go. So it's going to look like this, which is basically the team names in a single column data frame. What we're instead going to do is we're going to use as is. So we're going to get the unique. So the unique function is basically saying, which isn't a problem here because we don't have repeated team names, but it is good practice to do in case you run into that situation. If we were scraping multiple seasons, for example, we're going to get only the distinct team names seen once, so the unique team names. And we're going to convert that into a string. So we're going to use paste, and we're going to paste the little the hyphen because we want to have, remember, we're reporting the results as is. So in Markdown, that hyphen is going to turn into like a dot, a bullet point. So we want a bullet point for each of those unique team names. And we're just going to throw make sure that there's a kind of column at the end of or a line break at the end of this with the \n, new line. And collapse equals blank is just going to basically turn this into a single string. So if we ran that, that's why it's called team string. It's going to be this kind of ugly string. And you're probably thinking, what would we do with this? Well, because we have the results as is, we can cat this string, and it's going to turn it into that. And now when we knit this, it's going to come out as the 30 teams in bulleted points. And you'll see how that differs from the Cabal output. But,
yep, I included both.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of cool. That actually looks really nice. You notice that it doesn't come out as a code chunk; it comes out as actual text, and that was done just within the code chunk itself. So no need to go into the normal Rmarkdown body and type each team out by hand. This is actually just pulling straight from the data and turning it into a list, a bulleted list right there in the Markdown report. Now, if we look at the Cabal output, this is fine. It returns it as this weird kind of data frame with a line underneath each team. And, there's some options we could set inside of that probably that would make that look a little bit better or a little bit different. But it doesn't look as clean as the one above it, which is literally just the bullet point list, which is really cool for this as is. Yeah, so that looks like a much cleaner report than this does with the lines.
Mm-hmm.
And then everything below this is, we did this last week or 2 weeks ago, which is some of our interactive plots and some of our plots that are showing teams relative to the rest of the league with regard to their offensive and defensive rebound performance so far this season. I guess the plots have varied slightly because probably the last time we did this code was like 3 weeks ago. And so teams have had, 3 or 4 games per week, so maybe 12, 10 to 12 games now. So maybe some teams have leapfrogged a few others if we look back, but
maybe.
But the code doesn't change. It's just the output, which is the beauty of our Markdown. We were working for the league office. We'd run the report every Monday and we'd have the updated results, right?
Yep. Yeah, so that's just some examples of the way that you could approach using, I'm going to stop sharing the screen to make us all big. So those are just some ways that you could be using our Markdown in the as-is results option to be manipulating your report. using your code and have it be based on the actual contents of the code itself, and really manipulate and make really fun and interesting reports that way.
Yeah, awesome.
So, all right, with that, I think we're going to call it. Thank you all for joining us. Please like and subscribe. As always, my name is Ellis Hughes. You can find me on Twitter at Ellis_Hughes.
And my name is Patrick Ward. OSP Patrick is my Twitter handle. At tidy_explained is our Twitter handle. Tidy.explained@gmail.com is where you could drop us an email if you'd like, or you can go on the GitHub repo, take out an issue, or probably the most common way that people hit us up is to like and subscribe on the YouTube channel and drop questions, comments, and interact with us there. And of course, we do have a Patreon page. If you'd like to subscribe to that and you enjoy our work and you want to buy us a coffee, which I've just finished, or maybe a beer, which it's 9:30, so I don't know if I should switch to right now, but maybe later. We'd greatly appreciate that.
All right. Thank you all so much. You keep on exploring your world.